The most powerful weapon in the world isn't a sword or a gun. It's a mirror. And for 1 month, I forced my mother-in-law to look into one every single day until the monster she saw staring back was finally her own. She wrote the rules to my personal hell, so I decided it was only fair that she be its first resident. If you've ever felt trapped, silenced, or controlled by someone who is supposed to love you, then you already understand the desperation that fueled my story. It's a story about breaking free, not by screaming, but by listening very, very carefully and taking notes. Stick around to see how I turned my monster-in-law's rulebook into her own personal prison. And if you believe in the power of quiet justice, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how this ends. Part 1. The Gilded Cage. It began, as most tragedies do, with a love story. When I met Michael, it felt like the universe had finally exhaled. He was kind, he was brilliant, and he had a laugh that could chase the shadows out of any room. Our courtship was a whirlwind of stolen weekends, late-night conversations that bled into sunrise, and the easy, comfortable silence of two people who had found their other half. He saw me, truly saw me, in a way no one ever had. When he proposed under a sky full of stars on the coast of Italy, my yes was the easiest word I'd ever spoken. I thought I was starting my forever. I just didn't realize it would be someone else's forever, not mine. The first time I met Margaret, his mother, was at a Sunday brunch held in her honor at a stuffy, high-end restaurant. The kind where the forks have more tines than you know what to do with, and the waiters look down their noses at you if you mispronounce the Chardonnay. Margaret was immaculate, a statue carved from expensive marble and disapproval. She was dressed in a tailored cream suit that probably cost more than my car, her silver hair coiffed into a perfect, unmoving helmet. Her smile never quite reached her eyes. They were a pale, piercing blue, and they scanned me from head to toe, lingering for a moment too long on my dress a little too bright, my shoes a little too trendy, and my handbag not a designer. "Sophia," she said, her voice smooth but cool, like river stones. "Michael has told me so much about you." The slight pause before the "so much" was a work of art. It implied that whatever he had said, it couldn't possibly capture the full, and likely disappointing, reality of me. Michael, bless his heart, was oblivious. He beamed, squeezing my hand under the table. "Isn't she amazing, Mom?" "She's a lovely," Margaret replied, taking a delicate sip of her water. The word lovely from her lips sounded like a diagnosis of a minor, but chronic, illness. I spent the entire brunch feeling like I was under an entomologist's microscope. My every gesture, every story, every bite of food was observed, catalogued, and filed away. When I mentioned I worked in graphic design, a field I was deeply passionate about, Margaret smiled thinly. "How creative," she mused. "It must be so fulfilling to have a little hobby to keep you busy." I tried to laugh it off, explaining that it was my career, a demanding and successful one. But the label had been applied. My profession was a hobby. I was not a serious person. I was a dalliance, a temporary amusement for her perfect son. Michael, sensing my discomfort, tried to steer the conversation. "Sophia's company just landed a huge national campaign, Mom. She's the lead designer on it." Margaret just nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on me. "That's nice. But a career is one thing, dear. A family is another. A man like Michael needs support. Real, dedicated support at home. It's a full-time job, you know. The most important job a woman can have." The message was clear. My life, my ambitions, my identity, they were all temporary. The real work, the important work, would be to erase myself in service of her son. I left that brunch with a knot of ice in my stomach. I told myself I was being sensitive, that she was just from a different generation. I convinced myself that she just needed to get to know me. Oh, how naive I was. She had no interest in getting to know me. She was only interested in how quickly she could sand down my edges until I fit into the perfect, daughter-in-law-shaped box she had already constructed in her mind. The wedding planning was the first real battleground. Margaret had opinions on everything, and her opinions were presented as non-negotiable facts. My choice of an autumn-themed wedding with warm, rustic colors was tacky. The venue I loved, a beautifully restored barn, was for commoners. The dress I cried in when I saw myself in the mirror was not befitting of a woman marrying into this family. She bulldozed every decision with a polite, "Oh, but darling, we couldn't possibly," or a concerned, "You'll thank me for this later." She would call the vendors behind my back to make adjustments. She chose the caterer, the florist, and even the flavor of our wedding cake. Michael, caught in the middle, just wanted peace. "She's just excited, Soph," he'd say, wrapping his arms around me. "She's been dreaming of this day her whole life." "What about the day I've been dreaming of?" I'd whisper back, but my voice always felt small, drowned out by the force of her will. I gave in, piece by piece, telling myself that these were small sacrifices for a lifetime of happiness. A wedding is just one day, I reasoned. The marriage is what matters. So I walked down the aisle in an ivory dress that felt like a costume, in a grand, sterile ballroom that felt like a museum, surrounded by lilies whose scent I hated, to marry the man I loved. As I stood at the altar, I caught Margaret's eye. She gave me a small, tight nod of approval. Not a smile, a nod. The kind a queen gives to a servant who has performed a task satisfactorily. In that moment, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I wasn't just marrying Michael. I was being acquired. The first few weeks of our marriage were a blur of thank you notes and the awkward merging of two lives. And Margaret was a constant, looming presence. She had a key to our new home, a housewarming gift that felt more like a leash. She would let herself in unannounced, just to drop off some mail, or to bring you a casserole. She'd arrive to find me in my sweatpants, working on a deadline for my home office, and her lips would purse in disapproval. "Still in your pajamas at 10 in the morning, Sophia?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Michael will be home for lunch soon. Don't you think you should freshen up?" A husband likes to see his wife looking her best. It was a slow, steady erosion of my space, my autonomy. She'd rearrange the decorative pillows on our couch. She'd go through my pantry and cupboards, tooting at my choice of generic brand spices and unhealthy snacks. She'd leave little notes everywhere, written in her sharp, slanted cursive. "This surface could use a polish," next to the coffee table. "Remember to empty the dishwasher promptly," on the machine's handle. "White wine should be chilled to 8 degrees Celsius, not 10, by the wine rack." My home stopped feeling like my own. It felt like a display property, and I was the perpetually failing caretaker. The rules began to codify. They were never presented as rules, of course. They were always suggestions or helpful advice from an older, wiser woman. Rule number 1, the house must be guest-ready at all times. This meant no stray papers, no shoes by the door, no coffee mug left on the counter. "You never know who might pop by," she'd say, and the unspoken who was always her. Rule number 2, dinner was to be on the table at 6:30 p.m. sharp. Not 6:32, not 6:40. Michael, she explained, had a sensitive stomach and thrived on routine. My work deadlines, my own fatigue, were irrelevant. One evening, I was engrossed in a project, lost track of time, and started cooking 20 minutes late. Michael didn't even notice, happily eating the pasta I served at 7 o'clock. But Margaret, who had called just to check in, heard the clatter of pans in the background. 7 o'clock? She gasped into the phone. Oh, that poor boy must be starving. A wife's first duty is to her husband's schedule, Sophia. Rule number 3, wardrobe. My clothes were a constant source of commentary. My favorite pair of ripped jeans were distasteful. The band t-shirts I loved were childish. She began buying me clothes, cashmere twin sets, silk blouses, and tailored trousers in beige, cream, and navy blue. A more sophisticated look, she called it. It reflects better on Michael. Wearing them felt like being strangled by beige fabric. The worst part was how it began to affect Michael. In the beginning, he defended me. Mom, please. Sophia is an amazing cook, he'd insist. Mom, I love how she decorated the living room. But Margaret was a master of psychological warfare. She wouldn't argue with him. She'd just sigh a long, mournful sound and say, "Of course, dear. You're happy. That's all that matters. I just worry. A man's home should be a sanctuary, a calm and orderly place to return to after a hard day's work. It sets the tone for his success." She was framing my personality, my very essence, as a threat to her son's well-being and career. She was poison, dripped slowly and methodically into the foundations of our marriage. And Michael, who adored his mother and had been conditioned for 30 years to seek her approval, began to buckle. The arguments between us started quietly. "Soph, could we just try to keep the kitchen counter a bit clearer? You know how it stresses Mom out." "It doesn't stress you out, does it?" "No, but it's just easier to keep the peace." Keeping the peace became our mantra. But it wasn't peace. It was a slow, painful surrender. I was the one surrendering pieces of myself, one after another, to appease the unappeasable Empress, Margaret. My friend started to notice. "You seem quiet," my best friend, Clara, said over coffee one day. "You haven't worn anything but shades of beige in a month. Is everything okay?" I wanted to tell her. I wanted to scream about the constant criticism, the invasion of privacy, the feeling of being an actress in my own life, performing the role of the perfect wife. But I was too ashamed. It felt like I had failed, not just as a wife, but as a modern woman. I was supposed to be strong, independent. Instead, I was being ruled by my mother-in-law's 1950s handbook on domesticity. The breaking point, the moment the last shred of my compliance was incinerated, came on a Tuesday. It was our 6-month anniversary. I had planned a special evening. I'd spent all day making Michael's favorite meal, beef bourguignon, a complex, slow-cooked dish. I'd set the table with our wedding china. I put on a dress Michael loved, a deep red one that Margaret would have called garish. I was excited, hopeful that we could reconnect, that we could find our way back to the easy, joyful couple we used to be. Just as I was lighting the candles, the front door opened. It was Michael, and trailing right behind him, holding a large Tupperware container, was Margaret. My heart sank into my stomach. Mom decided to surprise us, Michael said, his smile a little too bright, a little too forced. She brought her famous lemon meringue pie. Margaret glided into my dining room, her eyes taking in the scene. The candles, the wine, the carefully set table for two. "Oh," she said, her voice a perfect imitation of surprise. "Are we interrupting something?" The "we" was a dagger. She had made herself a part of my marriage. Before I could answer, she walked over to the stove, lifted the lid on my bourguignon, and sniffed. "Beef stew? That's rustic," she commented. She then proceeded to walk through the house, running her finger over a dusty bookshelf, pointing out a single, almost invisible cobweb in the corner of the ceiling. She sat at my anniversary dinner table and lectured me for 20 minutes about the importance of deep cleaning the house seasonally. She talked about how a cluttered environment leads to a cluttered mind, and how that could negatively impact Michael's performance at his law firm. She didn't say it was my fault. She never did. She just laid out the problem, and since I was the one at home, the implication was as clear as the crystal goblets she insisted we use. Michael sat there, silent, staring at his plate. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I felt a cold, terrifying rage building in my chest, so immense it felt like it would split me in two. I had spent 8 hours cooking this meal, crafting this evening to celebrate our love, and she had hijacked it, dismantled it, and used it as a platform for another one of her soul-crushing critiques. After she finally left, leaving behind half a pie and a house that felt contaminated by her presence, the silence was deafening. I looked at Michael, my eyes pleading with him. "Why?" I whispered. "Why did you let her do that? Tonight of all nights." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked exhausted. "Sophia, she was just trying to be nice bringing the pie. What was I supposed to do? Tell her to go away?" "Yes," I said, my voice rising, trembling. "You were supposed to tell her that your wife planned a private, romantic dinner for your anniversary. You were supposed to protect us. This is our home. Our marriage. Not hers." "You're being dramatic," he said, and those 3 words broke something inside me. It's just who she is. It's easier to just let it go. Let it go. He was asking me to let go of my dignity, to let go of my home, to let go of my identity. I stared at him, this man I loved, and for the first time, I saw the invisible strings connecting him to his mother. He wasn't my partner in this fight. He was a willing hostage, and I was the collateral damage. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, feeling the cold space between me and my husband, and I replayed every condescending comment, every backhanded compliment, every imposed rule from the last 6 months. The anger was still there, but it was changing. The hot, frantic rage was cooling, hardening into something else. Something cold, clear, and sharp. Like ice. She thought I was weak. She thought I was a silly little girl with a hobby who could be molded and controlled. She thought she was the queen of this family, and that her rules were law. I looked over at Michael's sleeping form, at the man I was losing to a war of attrition I hadn't even known I was fighting. No more, I thought. The ice in my veins was turning to steel. I would no longer suffer in silence. I would no longer try to reason or beg. Confronting her with anger was pointless. She thrived on drama, casting herself as the victim. I had to use a different language. A language she would understand. The language of power, of rules, of absolute, binding control. She had built my cage, meticulously, piece by piece. And as the first hint of dawn broke through the blinds, a new thought took root in my mind, a wild, audacious, and terrifyingly beautiful idea. I was going to get her to lock herself inside it. Part 2. The slow suffocation. The decision to fight back was like lighting a match in a cavern. For a single, brilliant moment, there was light and defiance. But then the match flickers, and the darkness rushes back in, vast and overwhelming. I had the will, but I had no weapon. My enemy wasn't a person I could reason with. Margaret was a force of nature, an institution, and my own husband was her most loyal soldier. I decided to start small, to try and reclaim my territory inch by painful inch. My first attempt was with Michael. I sat him down a few days after the disastrous anniversary dinner, my hands clammy, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Michael," I began, keeping my voice as calm and steady as I could manage. "We need to talk about your mother." He immediately tensed up, his shoulders hunching. "Soph, not again." "Yes, again," I insisted, my voice firmer this time. "This isn't working. I feel like I'm a guest in my own home. I feel like I have to pass a daily inspection. We need boundaries. The unannounced visits have to stop. She needs to call before she comes over." It seemed like such a reasonable request. A basic courtesy. But Michael looked at me as if I'd suggested we build a moat around the house. "She's my mother, Sophia. She's family. I can't just tell her she's not welcome." "I'm not saying she isn't welcome. I'm saying she needs to respect that this is our home, our private space. It's about respect, Michael." "She's just trying to help," he mumbled, the familiar, infuriating mantra. "Her generation, they just drop by. It's how they show they care." "No, Michael. It's how she shows she's in charge." The words were out before I could stop them, sharp and true. The argument that followed was ugly. He accused me of being ungrateful for all she did, for being overly sensitive, for trying to drive a wedge between him and his family. I accused him of being a coward, of prioritizing his mother's feelings over his wife's sanity. We ended up sleeping back to back, the space between us a frozen, silent chasm. The boundary had not been set. Instead, I had just pushed my husband further away. My next attempt was with Margaret herself. I decided to meet her on her own turf, literally. I invited her for lunch at the stuffy, overpriced restaurant she loved. I wore one of the beige cashmere twin sets she'd bought me, a sartorial white flag. My plan was to be disarmingly sweet, to frame my needs as a way to be a better wife for her son, using the language she would understand. "Margaret," I said, after we had ordered our salads, "I so appreciate all your guidance since Michael and I got married. It's been wonderful to have your experience to draw on. She preened, taking a small, satisfied sip of her iced tea. Of course, dear. I'm happy to help. You have a lot to learn. I do, I agreed, swallowing my pride. And one of the things I'm trying to learn is how to manage my time better, to give Michael the full attention he deserves when he comes home. I've found that sometimes, when you pop by in the afternoon, I get a bit flustered and thrown off my schedule for dinner prep. I watched her face, hoping to see a flicker of understanding. Instead, her eyes narrowed slightly. Are you saying you don't wish for me to visit? Not at all. I rushed to say. I just think it would be so helpful for my planning if you could perhaps give me a quick call before you head over. That way I can make sure I'm not in the middle of something and can give you my full attention, too. She placed her fork down with a delicate, deliberate click. She looked at me, a long, unblinking stare that made me feel like a bug. Then, she smiled, a chillingly sweet expression. Oh, you poor dear, she said, her voice dripping with pity. You think this is about you, don't you? Sophia, my visits aren't social calls. They are a support system. For Michael, I am ensuring his home life is stable so that he can excel in his career. My son is destined for great things, and I will not allow his domestic situation to be a distraction. If my presence ensures the laundry is done correctly and his dinner is on time, then that is a small price to pay, isn't it? She patted my hand, her skin dry and cool. Don't worry. You'll get used to it. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just a failure, it was a masterclass in psychological domination. She had twisted my polite request for a phone call into an admission of my own incompetence. She had framed her intrusions as a noble sacrifice she was making for her son's future and my desire for privacy as a selfish impediment to his success. I left that lunch feeling smaller and more powerless than ever before. The message was clear. I was not the lady of the house. I was staff. And as if to punish me for my audacity, Margaret's campaign of control escalated. The suggestions became directives. She started leaving a handwritten schedule for me on the kitchen counter every Monday morning. It was laminated. It detailed my week, hour by hour. Monday, 9 a.m., groceries. Use the list I've provided. 11 a.m., polish the silver. 2 p.m., iron Michael's shirts, heavy starch on the collars. Tuesday, 10 a.m., deep clean the bathrooms. 1 p.m., prepare lasagna for Wednesday. It tastes better the next day. And so on. It was absurd, demeaning, insane. When I showed it to Michael, he just shrugged. She's just trying to be organized. She thinks it's helping you. Then came the financial scrutiny. She insisted on reviewing our weekly grocery receipts, circling items she deemed frivolous, like the dark chocolate I loved or the imported coffee beans Michael enjoyed, with a red pen. An exercise in household economy, she called it. She started questioning my spending on clothes, on lunches with friends. That's money that could be going into a savings account for your future children, she'd say, a pointed look in her eye. The worst, the most violating, was the invasion of our social life. She felt she had the right to approve of my friends. When Clara came over for a glass of wine, Margaret, who had of course popped by unannounced, sat with us, interrogating Clara about her job, her family, her romantic life. After Clara left, Margaret turned to me. She's a bit loud, isn't she? And that laugh. A bit common. You are a reflection of your husband now, Sophia. You must surround yourself with the right kind of people. I felt a volcanic rage. You do not get to choose my friends, Margaret. I'm not choosing them, dear, she said serenely. I'm merely offering a perspective on what is best for this family. I was suffocating. The walls of my beautiful home felt like they were closing in. My life was no longer my own. It was a performance, and Margaret was the director, the critic, and the entire audience. My work, my one refuge, began to suffer. I couldn't focus. I'd be in the middle of a design, and my mind would drift, wondering if I'd remembered to switch the laundry over, terrified of the little reminder note I'd find if I hadn't. The physical toll was undeniable. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. I was constantly on edge, my stomach in a perpetual knot of anxiety. Every time I heard a car door slam outside, my adrenaline would spike, my body bracing for an inspection. I was a prisoner in a war I couldn't see, fighting an enemy who wore the mask of love and concern. And the loneliness was the most corrosive acid of all. I had lost my partner. Michael was a ghost in our marriage, placating me with "I'm sorry you feel that way," and placating his mother by enforcing her regime. He was so deep in her fog that he couldn't see what was happening. Or perhaps he didn't want to. It was easier for him. He got a perfectly kept home, perfectly ironed shirts, and a mother who was happy. The only cost was his wife's soul. It was during this dark, hopeless period that I began to write things down. At first, it wasn't a plan. It was an act of self-preservation. I started a private document on my laptop, password protected and buried in a folder of old work files. I called it the rulebook. I needed to see the absurdity of it all written down in black and white, to prove to myself that I wasn't the one who was crazy. I started with the rules, she stated outright. Dinner at 6:30 p.m. sharp. House to be guest-ready at all times. No social plans without prior discussion. This one was added after I dared to go to a movie with Clara without clearing it first. Then, I started adding the unwritten rules, the ones conveyed through sighs and pointed looks. Wardrobe must be muted, conservative, and above all, expensive-looking. All household cleaning products must be the brands Margaret approves of. Expressions of professional ambition are to be framed as hobbies. Friends must pass a rigorous, unspoken background check. Every time she imposed a new restriction, every time she made a soul-crushing comment, I would retreat to my office, my hands trembling, and I would add it to the list. The document grew, day by day, into a horrifying testament to her tyranny. It was a catalog of 1,000 tiny cuts. Reading it back was terrifying. It looked like the charter for a cult or the regulations for a high-security prison. It was my life. The turning point, the moment the simple act of documentation evolved into the architecture of my revenge, happened on a Saturday in late spring. Michael's firm was hosting its annual garden party at the home of a senior partner. It was a huge event, critical for Michael's career. Margaret, of course, took a vested interest in my appearance. She insisted on taking me shopping and picked out a pale lilac dress. It was beautiful, but it wasn't me. It was shapeless and matronly. Classic and elegant, she declared. You'll look respectable. The morning of the party, I was a wreck of nerves. As I was doing my makeup, Margaret came into our bedroom without knocking. She watched me in the mirror, her arms crossed. "A little less of that dark eyeliner, dear," she said. "It's too aggressive. A soft brown is more appropriate." I gritted my teeth and wiped it off. She then watched me get dressed. I put on the lilac dress. I felt like a ghost. Then I reached for a pair of silver earrings, a delicate, modern design Michael had given me for my birthday. "No," she said, her voice sharp. "Not those. The pearls." She pointed to the simple pearl studs she had given me for Christmas. Pearls are timeless. They signal good breeding. Something in me snapped. It was such a small thing, the choice of an earring, but it was everything. It was the final, tiny piece of myself she was trying to erase. "I like the silver ones," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Michael gave them to me. And I am telling you to wear the pearls," she replied, her voice dropping to a low, icy tone. "Do not embarrass your husband, Sophia. His career is on the line. Do you want his partners to think he married a rebellious child?" I looked from her cold, determined face to my own pale, defeated reflection in the mirror. I saw the girl who loved bright colors and loud music and ripped jeans, and I saw the beige, silent woman I was becoming. I looked at the silver earrings in my hand, a symbol of the man who had loved that girl. And then I looked at the pearls, a symbol of my bondage. With a shaking hand, I took off the silver earrings and put on the pearls. As I walked out of the room, Margaret gave me that familiar, tight-lipped nod of approval. The nod of the queen to the obedient servant. And in that moment, the match I had lit in the cavern weeks ago was reignited, only this time it wasn't a tiny flicker. It was an inferno. The anger was so pure, so clarifying, it burned away all the fear and all the despair. She wanted rules. She wanted control. She wanted to dictate every last detail of a person's life to ensure the perfect outcome. Fine. I would give her exactly what she wanted. I went to the party. I smiled. I made small talk. I was the perfect, respectable, pearl-wearing wife. But behind my serene mask, my mind was racing, the pieces of a plan clicking into place with terrifying speed and precision. I looked at Margaret, holding court with the partners' wives, laughing her cool, controlled laugh, so confident in her power. She had no idea she was standing on a trapdoor. She had no idea that I had spent the last 2 months meticulously drawing the blueprints for the prison she had designed, the one I was about to build right around her. I thought of the document on my computer, the rule book. It wasn't just proof that I wasn't crazy anymore. It was a draft of a contract. And the signing party was going to be epic. Part 3. Forging the Mirror. The drive home from that garden party was silent, but for me, it was electric. Michael, sensing my glacial calm, occasionally shot me worried glances. He probably thought I was stewing, on the verge of another tearful breakdown. He couldn't have been more wrong. The tears were gone, boiled away by the white-hot fire in my gut. I wasn't sad. I was busy. My mind was a flurry of activity, an architect's office in the middle of the night, blueprints and calculations flying everywhere. For the next 4 weeks, I became the woman Margaret always wanted me to be. On the surface, I was a ghost of perfect compliance. I woke up early. The house was immaculate. Dinner was on the table at 6:29 p.m. I wore the beige and lilac clothes she'd bought me, my hair in a neat, sensible bun. I smiled placidly. I agreed with everything she said. You're right, Margaret. That is a much more efficient way to fold the towels. Of course, Margaret. Thank you for the suggestion. I'll only buy that brand of olive oil from now on. She was delighted. She thought she had finally broken me, that the last embers of my defiance had been stamped out. She would boast to Michael on the phone, her voice carrying from the other room. Sophia is finally coming around. She just needed a firm, guiding hand. Her victory lap was my camouflage. While she was basking in the glow of her supposed triumph, I was working. Every night, after Michael was asleep, I would slip out of bed and go to my office. The document, the rule book, was open on my screen, but it was no longer a journal of despair. It was becoming a weapon. I spent hours transforming my raw, emotional notes into cold, hard legalese. I researched contract templates online, learning the language of obligation and consequence. Whereas I typed, my fingers flying across the keyboard, Margaret Sterling, hereinafter referred to as the matriarch, has established a comprehensive system of domestic and personal protocols. And whereas the matriarch asserts that adherence to these protocols is the sole and direct cause of a successful marriage and a harmonious home. The clauses were magnificent in their pettiness, each one a perfectly polished stone of her own making, now to be used in the foundation of her cell. Clause 4A, the schedule of domestic duties. A detailed, minute-by-minute breakdown of the laminated schedule she had created for me, from 7 a.m., wake, dress, and prepare husband's coffee, French press, 94 degrees Celsius water, to 10 p.m., final kitchen sweep and linen check. Clause 7B, wardrobe and personal appearance. The subject's attire must be pre-approved for all public outings. A palette of muted, non-aggressive colors, e.g., beige, cream, navy, soft pastels, is mandated. Jewelry is to be limited to classic, understated pieces such as a single strand of pearls. Aggressive eyeliner is expressly forbidden. Clause 9C, financial scrutiny. All household expenditures over $20 must be accompanied by a receipt and submitted for weekly review. A written justification for any items deemed frivolous or unnecessary must be provided. Clause 12A, social vetting. All personal friendships and social engagements are subject to review and approval by the overseeing party to ensure they align with the family's social standing and public image. I added sections she had only implied, turning her passive-aggressive sighs into binding articles. I even included a clause about attitudinal compliance, requiring the subject to maintain a pleasant and agreeable demeanor at all times, refraining from expressions of frustration, disagreement, or excessive emotion. It was her entire philosophy, distilled into a 10-page document of pure, unadulterated tyranny. But a contract needed more than just clauses. It needed teeth. I added a section titled, Terms and Conditions of the Demonstration Period. I stipulated a 30-day trial, wherein the creator of the rules, the matriarch, would personally demonstrate their efficacy and feasibility. And here was the masterstroke. I added a clause about transparency and documentation. To properly assess the success of this system, I wrote, the subject agrees to be documented via photographs and video recordings throughout the 30-day period. These materials may be shared within a controlled, private online forum for the purpose of study and discussion among interested family and community members. I would get her consent to build the evidence of her own undoing. The final section was consequences of noncompliance. It detailed penalties for failed tasks or rule violations, public acknowledgement of the failure, forfeiture of personal leisure time, and, in the case of a complete breach, a formal, written apology to be read aloud at a family gathering. As I worked, I felt a thrilling, almost terrifying sense of power. This document was a perfect mirror, reflecting her own cruelty back in flawless, undeniable detail. The next step was orchestrating the unveiling. It couldn't be a private confrontation. She would simply laugh in my face. It had to be public. It had to be in front of an audience whose opinion she valued more than anything, her friends, her family, the pillars of her community. Margaret's birthday was in 6 weeks. Every year, she threw a lavish party for herself at her home. It was the perfect stage. I volunteered, insisted, on planning it for her. My gift to you, Margaret, I said with my new, serene smile. You do so much for us. It's the least I can do. She was suspicious at first, but my recent transformation into the perfect daughter-in-law had worked. She agreed, handing me her address book. Don't cut corners, Sophia. My guests have certain expectations. Of course not, I promised. It will be a party no one will ever forget. For the next month, I was a whirlwind of planning. I ordered catering from her favorite restaurant. I hired a string quartet. I selected flowers that complemented her decor. And I sent out the invitations. To her sisters. To Michael's influential uncle, a retired judge. To her best friends from the country club, the women whose approval she craved. To everyone who mattered in her perfectly curated world. I also did one more thing. I called my friend Clara, a tech-savvy web designer. I have a strange project for you, I said. I need you to build a simple, password-protected blog for me. A place to post photos and updates for a family project. The day of the party, our house was quiet. Michael was out running errands. I printed the contract on the thickest, most expensive cream-colored cardstock I could find. I punched holes in the side and bound it with a dark green ribbon. It looked official. It felt final. I held it in my hands, the weight of it tangible. It was the heaviest thing I had ever held. That evening, as I put on the lilac dress and the pearl earrings, I looked at myself in the mirror. 6 months ago, this reflection would have been a symbol of my defeat. Tonight, it was a costume. It was my armor. When we arrived at Margaret's house, the party was already in full swing. The sound of polite laughter and the gentle music of the string quartet filled the air. Margaret was gliding through the crowd, a queen in her court, accepting compliments on her party. My party. I felt a grim satisfaction. I moved through the room, greeting people, my smile never faltering. I made sure the judge had a fresh drink. I complimented Margaret's sister on her dress. I was the perfect hostess, the perfect wife. I was laying the last of my traps. Over the past year, I continued, I have had the unique privilege of learning from Margaret. She has a deep and profound wisdom about how to run a home, how to support a husband, and ultimately, how to build a successful life. She has generously provided me with a comprehensive set of rules and guidelines for living. A system, she calls it. I saw Michael frown slightly, confused. Margaret's smile became a little tighter. Her conviction in this system is so absolute, I went on, my voice ringing with false sincerity, that it has inspired me. I realized that the best gift I could give her today isn't flowers or perfume. It's the gift of recognition. A chance for her to formally share her wisdom with the world. I reached into my handbag and pulled out the ribbon-bound document. I have taken the liberty of codifying her entire system into a single document. A formal contract, if you will, outlining every single one of her brilliant rules for domestic perfection. A confused murmur rippled through the room. I walked forward and handed the document to Margaret. Her hands trembled slightly as she took it. She flipped through the pages, her eyes widening, her face slowly losing its color as she read the clauses. Clause 4A, the schedule. Clause 7B, wardrobe. Clause 12A, social vetting. What is the meaning of this? She whispered, her voice a venomous hiss only I could hear. I turned back to the audience, my voice full of admiration. I believe that a system this powerful shouldn't just be told, it should be demonstrated. So, my proposal is this. Since Margaret is the architect of these conditions for a perfect life, who better to prove their effectiveness? I propose she undertake a 30-day demonstration, living by her own rules, to show us all how it's done. The room was utterly silent. You could have heard a pearl drop. I saw the trap in the judge's eyes first. A flicker of amused understanding. Of course, I finished, my voice soft but carrying in the stillness. I would never ask her to do this without a formal agreement. I held up a single sheet of paper and a pen. This is just a signature page, agreeing to the 30-day demonstration period. A way to formally commit to this incredible teaching opportunity in front of the family and friends who admire her so much. I had her. Oh, I had her completely. In that moment, she had two choices. She could refuse, exposing herself as a hypocrite who couldn't stomach her own medicine, revealing the rules as the tools of control they were. She would be humiliated in front of her entire social circle. Or she could sign. Drowned by her own suffocating pride, certain she could endure anything, she could accept the challenge to prove her own superiority. Her jaw was tight, her blue eyes blazing with a hatred so pure, it was almost beautiful. She looked around the room, at the expectant faces, at the judge's raised eyebrow, at her sister's confused smile. Her reputation was on the line. Her entire identity was built on being the perfect, strong, capable matriarch who was always right. She snatched the pen from my hand. With a sharp, angry flick of her wrist, she signed her name on the line. The trapdoor swung open, and the queen fell right in. Part 4. The Inmate in the Mirror. The first day of the demonstration period began at 7 a.m. the following Monday. As per Clause 4A, I arrived at Margaret's house, letting myself in with the spare key she didn't know I had copied. I found her in the kitchen, drinking coffee in a silk robe, looking sullen. "Good morning, Margaret," I said brightly, holding a clipboard. "As per the contract, I'm here for the morning check-in. I see you're still in your dressing gown. The schedule dictates being fully dressed in pre-approved attire by 7:30 a.m. That's a minor infraction, but I'll let it slide as it's the first day. A verbal warning." The look she gave me could have curdled milk. "Get out of my house." "I'm afraid I can't do that," I said, my voice calm and pleasant. Clause 15C stipulates that the overseeing party, that's me, must have reasonable access to the premises to ensure compliance. Now, the silver needs polishing, and then you have to deep clean the guest bathroom. I've left the approved list of cleaning products on the counter for you. The month that followed was a spectacle of poetic justice. I was relentless. I was a mirror of her own behavior, reflecting every bit of her petty tyranny back at her, but with a cheerful, helpful smile that made it all the more infuriating. I would pop by unannounced, just as she had done to me. I'd find her trying to read a book in the garden and say, "Oh, taking a break, are we? That's lovely, but the schedule does say 3 p.m. is for ironing." A man likes his shirts crisp, remember? I enforced the wardrobe clause with glee. One afternoon, she was about to leave to meet her friends for bridge, wearing a stylish crimson jacket. I stopped her at the door. Margaret, I'm afraid that jacket is in violation of Clause 7b. Crimson is far too aggressive. The beige cashmere you bought for me would be much more appropriate. It signals good breeding. Her friends were waiting in the car outside. Humiliated, she went back upstairs and changed. The financial scrutiny was her personal breaking point. At the end of the first week, I sat at her dining room table as she handed me a small stack of receipts. I put on a pair of reading glasses and examined them with performative seriousness. L'Occitane hand soap? I tutade, circling it with a red pen. Margaret, the generic store brand, is a third of the price and works just as well. This is a frivolous expense. As per Clause 9c, you'll need to provide a written justification for this. It's my money, she hissed, her face flushed with rage. The contract applies to all household expenditures to promote fiscal responsibility, I replied smoothly, not looking up. The system is the system. Meanwhile, the private blog, titled The Sterling Method, a 30-day domestic experiment, was a wild success. With Margaret's signed consent from the contract, I posted daily updates for our select audience of family and friends. A photo of Margaret on her hands and knees scrubbing the grout of her bathroom, captioned, Day 5. Margaret is demonstrating the importance of detailed, deep cleaning for a harmonious home. A short video of me inspecting her pantry, pointing out a bag of potato chips. Day 12. A minor setback in nutritional compliance, but we're treating it as a learning opportunity. The blog became a source of whispered gossip and debate. Some older relatives thought I was being cruel. But most people, including the judge and many of her own friends who had silently suffered her judgment for years, saw it for what it was, a masterclass in comeuppance. They saw the absurd rules in black and white and recognized the quiet cruelty they had always ignored. Michael's journey was the most profound. He had been horrified at the party, pulling me aside to hiss, What have you done, Sophia? But I held my ground. I'm doing exactly what your mother taught me to do, I'd told him. I'm enforcing the rules for a perfect life. He started visiting his mother alone. At first, it was to comfort her, but he found her exhausted, frayed, and angry. He saw her flinch when the doorbell rang. He heard her complain that she had no freedom, that she felt like a prisoner in her own home, that she was losing her mind. She's just trying to help you, Mom, he said to her one afternoon, echoing the words he had said to me 100 times. It's just who she is. It's easier to just let it go. The words hung in the air between them. I wasn't there, but he told me about it later. He said in that moment, seeing the despair on his mother's face, he finally understood. He saw the last year through my eyes. He saw the 1,000 cuts, the slow suffocation, the quiet desperation he had dismissed as me being dramatic. He left his mother's house that day and came home to me. He walked into the living room, his eyes full of a pain and regret that was years in the making. I'm so sorry, Sophia, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I let her do that to you. I let her do that to us. He broke down and I held him, the first genuine, united moment we'd had in a year. The mirror I had forged for his mother had ended up showing him his own reflection, too. By the end of the 3rd week, Margaret was broken. The imperious queen was gone, replaced by a tired, hollowed-out old woman. Her fire was gone. She did the chores listlessly. She wore the beige clothes without argument. The fight had left her. On the 30th and final day, I arrived to find her sitting at her kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of tea. The house was clean, but not immaculate. There was a fine layer of dust on the mantelpiece. You missed a spot, I said softly, running a finger over it. She didn't get angry. She just looked up at me, her eyes watery. I can't do this, she whispered. It's impossible. No one can live like this. I know, I said. The contract stipulated a final review, to be held at a family dinner. I booked a private room at a restaurant. This time, the guest list was smaller, Just me, Michael, her sisters, and the judge. Margaret sat at the head of the table, looking small and fragile. As per the final clause, she was required to read a statement. She pulled a single, folded piece of paper from her handbag. Her hands shook as she opened it. "I have failed the 30-day demonstration," she read, her voice thick with emotion. "The rules I created, the system I believed in, it's not a system for a harmonious home. It's a system of control. It's cruel." She looked up, her eyes finding mine across the table. "It's demeaning and destructive." She put the paper down. "What I did to you, Sophia," she said, her voice dropping to a raw, personal whisper. "It was wrong. I wasn't trying to protect my son. I was afraid of losing him. I was jealous of the life you were building with him. And I tried to tear it down by controlling you. I am sorry. Not just for the rules, but for the pain I caused you. I am truly, deeply sorry. It was real. It wasn't a performance." The mirror had not just broken her pride, it had shown her the truth. I looked at this woman who had been my tormentor, my jailer, and I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel hatred. I felt a quiet release. I had not set out to destroy her. I had set out to save myself. "I accept your apology, Margaret," I said. And just like that, the war was over. Our lives didn't magically become perfect, but they became real. The power dynamic was forever altered. Margaret slowly, cautiously, began to build a new relationship with me, one based on a hard-won respect. The visits were scheduled. The advice was only given when asked for. She started to see me not as an accessory to her son, but as a person. Michael. And I had to rebuild, too. We went to counseling. He had to learn how to be a husband first and a son second. I had to learn to trust him again. But our foundation, once cracked and poisoned, was now being relayed with honesty and mutual protection. It was stronger than it had ever been. Sometimes, when I'm in my office, I open that old file on my computer, the rule book. It's still there, a monument to a dark time. But beside it now, I've saved a scan of the final contract page, with her angry, defiant signature at the bottom. It's a reminder that I didn't win by screaming louder or fighting harder. I won by listening, by writing it all down, and by forging a mirror out of my own prison bars. I held it up, and I let the monster see herself. And in doing so, I didn't just reclaim my marriage or my dignity. I reclaimed me. Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. I think it's a dish best served according to the exact, impossible recipe the other person wrote for you. Because when they finally have to taste their own cooking, they learn a lesson that no amount of shouting could ever teach. What do you think? Was the contract a step too far, or the perfect, poetic justice? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice, served with a side of strategy. Thanks for listening.